Hello, this is Patty Young, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Times, the February 24th issue of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Trump administration scrambles to pick up the pieces of broken tariffs. President Trump is already working to piece his tariff program back together after a Supreme Court ruling ruptured a centerpiece of his economic agenda. The Trump administration has begun using a patchwork of trade laws to recreate the sweeping tariffs that the Supreme Court struck down as illegal last week. But the approach will require a more cumbersome set of tariffs, ones that Mr. Trump will not be able to issue quickly or on a whim. The tariffs may be levied by country, trade issue, or product, and will probably take months to go into effect. The question now is how closely the old structure will be reproduced, or whether the new tariffs could end up creating an entirely different set of winners and losers. The process is already creating friction inside the administration as officials try to satisfy Mr. Trump's desire for swift and punishing tariffs. Officials at the Office of the United States Trade Representative and the Commerce Department are vying for which agency should be in the lead, people familiar with the matter said. At the Trade Representative's office, employees have begun working on new investigations that will cover most major trading partners and could result in tariffs grouped by country or trade issue. In an interview on ABC This Week on Sunday, Jamieson Greer, the trade representative, said he would be initiating investigations related to issues like excess industrial capacity, which would cover a lot of countries in Asia that make more than they can consume. We had to look at backup plans, and we found ways to really reconstruct what we're doing, he said. Now it doesn't have the same flexibility that the president had under the previous authority that he was using, but it gives us very durable tools. Mr. Greer added that the president had been campaigning on tariffs and intended to deliver on his promises. The legal tool to implement it, that might change, but the policy hasn't changed. Mr. Greer had said in a statement on Friday that his staff would be investigating a variety of trade issues, including excess capacity, forced labor, pharmaceutical pricing, discrimination against U.S. tech companies, ocean pollution, and unfair trading practices for seafood and rice. Those investigations would be carried out on an accelerated timeline under Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974, which allows the administration to impose potentially crippling tariffs if it finds evidence of unfair trade behavior. The office would also continue prior Section 301 investigations involving countries like China and Brazil. At the Department of Commerce, employees are looking into trade investigations on industries including batteries, chemicals, plastics, and equipment for telecommunications and the electrical grid. People familiar with the matter had said. Those investigations are being run under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, which allows for tariffs to be imposed on national security grounds. Mr. Trump has already imposed tariffs on a raft of products using Section 232, including steel, pharmaceuticals, furniture, and other goods, which could be expanded to cover related goods. The department could also move quickly to issue new tariffs using investigations underway into sectors like minerals, semiconductors, robotics, and medical equipment. Neither USTR nor the Commerce Department provided a comment. In a social media post Monday, Mr. Trump said he had plenty of other options to impose taxes on imports. The court has also approved all other tariffs, of which there are many, and they can all be used in a much more powerful and obnoxious way with legal certainty than the tariffs as initially used, he said. As the complex effort to rebuild the tariffs unfolds, it is likely to inject even more uncertainty into the economy. Companies have spent the past year trying to navigate Mr. Trump's unpredictable trade policies. We are in a spot of more uncertainty than we were last week as to what tariffs will look like in a month or 2 months or 6 months down the road, said Greta Pesch, a partner at the law firm Wiley Rein, who was a trade official in the Biden administration. It does increase the complexity. There are more moving parts to this. The old system of tariffs that Mr. Trump announced last year was already vastly complicated, involving double-digit tariffs that varied for different trading partners based on trade flows, trade practices, negotiations with the United States, and seemingly the president's whims. The new system may be even more Byzantine, though much of it still needs to be determined. For now, Mr. Trump has used a legal authority known as Section 122 of the 1974 Trade Act to replace the tariffs the Supreme Court has struck down. Section 122 allows the administration to impose up to a 15% tariff for 150 days. After that, the tariffs would need approval by Congress, which trade experts say is unlikely given that tariffs are unpopular with many voters. The administration has already created some notable exemptions for the new 15% global tariffs, some of which are more generous than before. For example, a new exemption for countries that were part of a Central American trade agreement signed in 2004. But beyond those carve-outs, the Section 122 tariffs are set at a flat rate globally at 15% for every country. That has been a major setback for some close allies and trading partners like Britain, Singapore, and Australia, which had previously faced lower tariff rates on their exports. The change has been a boon for others, though, like China, India, and Brazil, whose tariff rates were previously set significantly higher. The flat 15% tariff is set to expire in late July. By that time, the administration has signaled that it will have other tariffs ready to go to replace it, using the Section 301 provision at the Trade Representative's Office and Section 232 tariffs at the Commerce Department. Another option for the administration would be looking to Congress to pass a trade bill. Mr. Greer had been interested in the idea of legislation that would lock in tariffs and other terms of the trade agreements his office negotiated over the past year, but neither administration officials nor lawmakers seem to see that as a possibility in an election year. As president, I do not have to go back to Congress to get approval of tariffs, Mr. Trump wrote on social media Monday morning. It has already been gotten in many forms a long time ago. As future tariffs are determined, companies and America's trading partners have a lot to lose or gain. As a result, the Trump administration is likely to face fierce lobbying from chief executives and foreign leaders. It will also have to contend with concerns about how voters view tariffs ahead of the midterm elections. The Supreme Court's ruling that Mr. Trump exceeded his legal authority in imposing certain tariffs centered on a powerful economic tool that the president used liberally over the past year. Mr. Trump wielded the 1977 emergency law, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, to punish and cajole trading partners over a range of issues, such as the trade deficit and the flow of fentanyl into the United States. A New York Times analysis in November found that the president had used IEEPA to impose tariffs on an estimated 29% of all imports, affecting more than $300 billion in imported goods. But there are questions about how much the Supreme Court ruling will really restrain the president, who continues to profess his devotion to tariffs. Mr. Trump has said in recent days that the Supreme Court decision affirmed his ability to use other tariff authorities, as well as more extensive trade measures like embargoes. While the other tariff laws require reports and public hearings, some government employees say that some of these processes have recently become an exercise in box checking. At the Commerce Department, for example, employees last year were inundated with requests to create complex reports under tight deadlines on the national security threat trade posed to critical industries such as minerals, semiconductors, and copper. Lori Wallach, the director of the Rethink Trade program at the American Economic Liberties Project, said the court's decision was not likely to have much effect on the overall economics of tariffs, but it could change the lightning bolt way Mr. Trump had chosen to impose them, she said, including against the European Union for regulating big tech companies or against Canada after it aired a television ad the president didn't like. We're not going to see a huge difference in tariff rates because they can use other authorities, but this could constrain Trump's Zeus-like use of tariffs as punishment on non-trade matters, Ms. Wallach said. In his first term, Mr. Trump had relied on other legal authorities, including Section 232 and Section 301, to impose his tariffs. The decision was made at the urging of advisors like Robert Lighthizer, then the trade representative, who saw IEEPA as vulnerable to court challenges. In the second term, Mr. Trump's advisors, like Mr. Greer, also recognized the threat of a legal challenge. But Mr. Trump was emboldened on his trade agenda. He wanted maximum power to threaten other countries with tariffs and negotiate trade deals, and he chose to use IEEPA because of its flexibility, advisors said. Mr. Trump drew on IEEPA to impose tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China in February and March for their roles in channeling fentanyl to the United States. He used it again in April as he announced a uniform 10% tariff on imports from nearly every country and significantly higher tariffs on several dozen, including some of the closest U.S. allies like the European Union and Japan. The Supreme Court decision still leaves in place the tariffs Mr. Trump has issued using other trade laws, including Section 232 and Section 301. The president has used those laws to impose tariffs on steel, aluminum, furniture, copper, cars, and other products, as well as the duties he issued in his first term on China and other trading partners. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Judges grow angry over Trump administration violating their orders. At least 35 times since August, federal judges have ordered the administration to explain why it should not be punished for violating their orders in immigration cases. The judge was angry. She had ordered a detained immigrant to be released in Minnesota, but instead he was let go in El Paso, where he had to spend the night in a shelter. All his property was supposed to have been returned, but the government was still holding his identity papers. "Why should I not hold you in contempt?" the judge asked a Justice Department lawyer at a hearing last week. Instead of answers, she got excuses. "I don't think there was ever any intention to defy the court orders," said the lawyer Matthew Izahara, a military judge advocate on temporary assignment to the Justice Department. "We were doing our best and things unfortunately slipped through the cracks." That explanation was not enough for Judge Laura M. Provenzino of the Federal District Court for the District of Minnesota. Last Wednesday, she found Mr. Izahara in civil contempt of court. Legal experts said her ruling marked the first time during President Trump's second term that a judge had attempted to assert authority by issuing a civil contempt ruling, which enforces a judicial order by imposing a penalty until the offending party complies. In this case, Judge Provenzino ordered Mr. Izahara to pay $500 a day until the identity documents were returned. But the anger Judge Provenzino flashed at Mr. Izahara has been repeated in courtrooms across the country amid Mr. Trump's drive to deport large numbers of immigrants. A New York Times review of federal dockets found at least 35 instances since August in which federal district court or magistrate judges issued an order requiring the government to explain why it should not be similarly punished for violating court orders, essentially giving officials one last chance to explain themselves. Those so-called show cause orders came from the judges in California, Texas, Florida, Massachusetts, Michigan, New York, West Virginia, and Puerto Rico. They all arose from cases in which the government had detained immigrants who had been living in the United States for years after entering the country illegally. They represent the culmination of weeks of frustration from the bench. Judges have castigated administration officials for testifying dishonestly, representing the law inaccurately, and above all, failing to comply promptly with their orders. Experts said that judges appeared to be grappling with a key question. Could the violations of court orders be explained merely by the stress on the legal system caused by the recent flood of immigration cases? Or is there a more systemic effort by the government to defy the courts? "Don't hide the ball," wrote Judge Roy Dalton Jr. in Florida, complaining that a Justice Department lawyer had failed to fully explain relevant law in one case. Antiseptic judicial rhetoric cannot do justice to what is happening, Judge Joseph R. Goodwin in West Virginia wrote in another, calling the warrantless arrest and imprisonment of thousands across the country an assault on the constitutional order. In a statement, Natalie Baldassar, a Justice Department spokeswoman, blamed rogue judges whom she accused of not following the law for allowing the high caseloads. The Trump administration, Ms. Baldassar said, was complying with court orders and fully enforcing federal immigration law. At first, the complaints were concentrated in Minnesota, where the federal bench has had to deal with the legal aftermath of Mr. Trump's surge of immigration agents. But they have since spread. In New Jersey alone, the Justice Department admitted last week that it had violated judicial orders 52 times in immigration detention cases since December 5th. In court, Justice Department lawyers have generally responded like Mr. Izahara, with respectful apologies and beleaguered references to their workloads. But in some of their internal communications, the Justice Department's leadership in Washington has taken a different posture, people familiar with them have said. During a call late last month with representatives from many of the nation's 93 U.S. attorneys' offices, Akash Singh, an Associate Deputy Attorney General, complained that judges' filing deadlines in detention cases were unrealistic and that some of their rulings were crazy, said a person familiar with the call who was granted anonymity to provide an account of an internal communication. And while Mr. Singh mentioned that the department planned to appeal some rulings, he also sounded a defiant note. "I want to just stress that an adverse decision from a judge is not a reason to stop doing what you know to be right," Mr. Singh says. "We are the ones charged with keeping America safe." Publicly, too, the department has at times dismissed the significance of unfavorable rulings. Judge Provenzino's order is a lawless abuse of judicial power, Daniel N. Rosen, the U.S. Attorney in Minnesota, wrote in an emailed statement on the night of the contempt ruling. Despite the aggressive rhetoric, the Justice Department decided to back down in Judge Provenzino's case. Last Thursday, the detainee's lawyer received an overnight FedEx package containing the missing identity documents. In response, the judge lifted her contempt order. Mr. Trump's sweeping raids have generated a flood of immigration cases in the federal courts. So too has a new administration policy of holding immigrants without bond. Before, immigrants were usually released on bond if they were not deemed a flight risk or danger to the community. As a result of the change, thousands of detainees have gone to the federal courts to challenge the legality of their detentions by filing what are known as habeas corpus petitions. That pileup has been aggravated by a Justice Department staffing shortage, so severe that some administration allies are publicly soliciting job applications from prospective prosecutors. The Justice Department has borrowed lawyers from the Department of Homeland Security, and in Mr. Izahara's case, the military. On the call with U.S. attorneys' offices, Mr. Singh said the department was trying to get more staffing, but in the meantime, he said, lawyers should expect to be working nights and weekends. As of Friday, Mr. Izahara alone was responsible for 104 detention cases over the past month in Minnesota, according to a search of the court's electronic case filing system. In written opinions and comments from the bench, judges have said repeatedly that they find the gripes about workload insufficient to excuse false representations and missed deadlines. In a sweeping order that demanded the government allow tens of thousands of detainees the means to challenge their detentions, Judge Sunshine S. Sykes in California noted that the volume of work was driven by the administration's own policies. Officials have chosen to avail themselves of these exact circumstances of which they now complain, she wrote. Noah Feldman, a Harvard law professor, said the judges appear to be assessing the possibility that the administration is purposefully defying its orders, and if so, what to do about it. We're at a moment where the courts are trying to figure out whether the Trump administration is systematically ignoring court orders or whether it's a function of overload plus incompetence plus an attitude of disrespect, he said. For now, said David A. Super, a Georgetown University law professor, the government's lawyers were going to have to deal with their diminished credibility in the eyes of the bench. Judges are understanding about individual shortcomings, he said. They're less understanding about systems than aren't even trying to get it right. This is just not sustainable. The number of court challenges to immigration detention has skyrocketed since last summer when the Department of Homeland Security began holding immigrants without bond. Judge Sykes in Central California noted that her district had received 551 petitions over a 5-week span. A judge in New Jersey found 547 petitions had been filed over 9 weeks there. A judge in the Western District of Texas said that as of January 29th, there were 134 active cases, with another 20 to 25 arriving each week. The influx has put a tremendous strain on the resources of the legal system, wrote Judge Tiffany M. Cartwright in Washington State. It has forced hurried and frustrating hearings, wrote Judge George L. Russell III in Maryland. Judge Clay D. Land in Georgia wrote that the situation had become an administrative judicial emergency. In an email, Judge Elizabeth A. Walford, the chief of the Federal District Court of the Western District of New York, said that the volume of habeas petitions in her district, which has only 4 judges on active status, had risen more than tenfold in the past 6 months to roughly 100 filings each month. This is just not sustainable, she wrote. Judges have been equally vocal in condemning the government's failure to promptly comply with their orders. It's not their job or temperament to seek confrontation with the executive branch, said Professor Feldman. But noting the unusually pointed judicial language, he added, if they feel their orders are not being followed, they know that's the definition of a challenge to the rule of law. Earlier this month, Judge Nusrat J. Chowdhury of the Eastern District of New York assailed the Trump administration for not only defying 2 clear and unambiguous orders, but also offering false statements about the whereabouts of a man Immigration and Customs Enforcement had detained on Long Island during a routine check-in. 6 days after she prohibited the government from moving the man outside the metro area, Judge Chowdhury wrote, the government placed him on a flight to Texas, then into detention in New Mexico. 2 days later, she wrote, an ICE official submitted a declaration giving her a false assurance that the man was still in New Jersey and would be present at a hearing she had called for the following day to consider his release. When the man, still held in New Mexico, missed that hearing, she tallied 2 separate violations of her orders and told the government to return him to Long Island and release him. Judge Chowdhury, an appointee of President Joseph R. Biden Jr., wrote that she considered holding officials in contempt over the violations, but decided against it because the detainee could not afford to pay a lawyer to file a motion, court filings show. In an opinion late last October, Judge David Briones of the Western District of Texas complained that a man he had ordered to not be removed from his district had been abruptly sent to Arizona and deported to Mexico the next day. Judge Briones, a Clinton appointee, urged the Justice Department to tighten up its coordination with the Department of Homeland Security to fix inconsequential lapses that led to irreparable consequences for parties and violations of court orders. Further mistakes, he added, may lead to sanctions or criminal contempt. In the Northern District of California last Tuesday, a judge held a hearing to consider holding ICE officials in contempt after they fast-tracked the deportation of a woman in spite of 3 separate court orders prohibiting the government from doing so. Judge Yvonne Gonzalez-Rogers, an Obama appointee, did not immediately rule on whether to hand down punishments. Last Friday, Judge Provenzino agreed not to impose fines in her Minnesota case since the former detainee's identity documents had been returned. But her forbearance had a limit, and the government, she said, was approaching it. She cited 10 other cases from January and February in which the Justice Department had come before her district's bench and pleaded for leniency. The refrain of understaffing and too many cases has worn out its welcome, particularly when it comes at the expense of individuals' rights, she wrote. She noted her own service for more than a decade as a federal prosecutor in the same Minnesota district, saying she empathized with Mr. Izahara's predicament. But going forward, she wrote, the goal should be 100% compliance with judicial orders. Judge Provenzino concluded by drawing a red line. What the court will not tolerate is what happened here, disobedience and radio silence from the government. The workers who couldn't stay home. Despite the snowstorm battering the New York area, workers whose jobs require them to show up in person found ways to attend to their duties. Sure, there were buckets of snow falling from the sky, howling winds, and a partial travel ban. But at Kew Gardens Animal Hospital in Queens, there was also a dog who had eaten a rubber ball, another who needed his deworming medication before he could hop a flight to Europe, and a cat recovering from lily poisoning. And so, Zara Ramirez, an office manager at the practice, was at her station on Monday, even if most of her colleagues were not. I luckily live around the block from the office, she said on the phone with a smile in her voice. Across the New York area, notwithstanding the blizzard, thousands of workers whose jobs require them to show up in person did just that. Nannies and health aides, doormen and doctors, pizza slingers and bartenders, and all manner of emergency responders. Aaron Duran, a clerk at Sunoco Station, Amityville on Long Island, where 17 inches of snow had already fallen by 8 a.m., answered the phone on Monday with 3 words, "We are open." Mr. Duran, 29, said he had come in after his boss called and said all his coworkers had bailed on their shifts. "I don't blame them," he said. "I said, let me do it. It's better than sitting at home." Mr. Duran had a stroke of good fortune on his 4 a.m. commute from nearby West Babylon. He found himself behind a plow truck and followed it all the way in. A few miles away at South Oaks Hospital, Bob Norton, 64, not only made it to work as a security guard, but also gave rides to 2 nurses whose cars could not traverse the unplowed roads. "You do what you've got to do," he said, though, like Mr. Ramirez and Mr. Duran, he said that some of his colleagues had stayed home. They had different values, he said. "I guess I'm old school." Down the road in downtown Copiague, there appeared to be only one shop open, Mi Plaza, a grocery and multi-service store with a sign advertising Central American products. Behind the counter, Carolina Videa, 32, was eating mango and tangerines and thinking about her relatives back in Nicaragua. They were the reason she had braved the snowy roads. "My family," she said in Spanish, "I need money." New York City's ban on non-essential driving until noon Monday was a boon to Jasmine Andrickson, a radiology supervisor at Jamaica Hospital in Queens. The trip from her home in Long Island City at the other end of the borough took only 25 minutes, partly because there was no one else on the road, and partly because someone had sent her the city's map of which streets had been plowed when. That was pretty cool, she said. Some workers found that there was a reward just for showing up. "Everyone's been so pleasant today," said Sarah Eve, a clerk at a 7-Eleven in Copiague. She had sold out of shovels and de-icers, but was doing a brisk business in another pairing, hot food and cold beer, she said. It's like the Super Bowl. For some newer New Yorkers, having to leave the house and trek to a job offered a crash course in the reality of living in a city where winter still sometimes happens. Chris Nada, 24, took the bus to work at a deli in Fort Greene, Brooklyn, wearing multicolored lace-up boots that were more stylish than waterproof. "I didn't know how I was supposed to dress," said Mr. Nada, 24, who moved to New York from Houston a year ago. As a steady stream of customers came in to stock up on groceries and toilet paper, Mr. Nada gestured out the window at the snow and declared himself kind of appalled. Then there were those whose work entails confronting the snow directly. On Sunday night, a manager at a 235-unit apartment complex in Hell's Kitchen in Manhattan put out an all-hands-on-deck call for shovelers. Michael Bohannon, 38, who works in maintenance, put on a few layers and made the 2-hour trip on the A train from his home in Far Rockaway, Queens. Throughout the night, he would clear off the rapidly accumulating snow for a couple of hours, take a 10-minute nap in the break room, and then go back out. "I would set my alarm clock," he said. "You've got to stay fresh." Tyrell Cook, 37, was one of the army of emergency shovelers hired by the city's sanitation department. He dug out crosswalks and bus stops in Chelsea and Manhattan from 8 p.m. Sunday to 4 a.m. Monday, went home to Queens to sleep for a few hours, and then headed out again. "There must be some people at the bus stop right now, happy there's no snow in the way," he said. He was pleased that Mayor Zoran Mamdani raised the wages for shovelers on Monday to $30 an hour from $19.14. In New Jersey, the pharmacy in the ironbound section of Newark that Pedro Torres manages was not even open, but he trekked in anyway, shovel in hand. "I came out because I give a damn about my community," said Mr. Torres, 53. "I don't want people slipping and falling. Everything should be nice and clear out front." A nearby restaurant, Ferry Street Barbecue, was packed with customers after the snow subsided. Marco Sosa, 45, who lives in Newark and works at the restaurant, knew why. "Not so many places are open because of the snow," he said as he hustled to serve another order of chicken, ribs, fries, and black beans. "People are always going to be hungry, no matter what." You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Trump claims a historic turnaround for the U.S. Here are the facts. Trends on jobs, inflation, and crime that began before Donald Trump retook office continued, largely unabated, in his first year back. In the days before his State of the Union address, President Trump has claimed to have ushered in a historic comeback. "So just 1 year ago, under crooked Joe Biden, and he was crooked as hell, our country was dead," he said at a rally last week in Georgia. "Now we have the hottest country. In 1 year, we have the hottest country anywhere in the world." But economic indicators and crime metrics do not show abrupt reversals from worst to best, as the president often brags. Rather, trends on these issues that began before Trump retook office continued, largely unabated, in his first year back. Here is what the data show. Inflation. "I inherited the worst inflation in the history of our country, and now we have almost no inflation," in an interview with NBC in February. False. Inflation has slowed under Mr. Trump, but not by the drastic margins he is claiming, and prices are still increasing above the target of 2% set by the Federal Reserve. Inflation has gone down, but it was declining before Trump took office. As measured by the Consumer Price Index, inflation reached a 4-decade high in the summer of 2022 at about 9.1% in June. That number was not a record, as Mr. Trump said. Inflation reached higher points in the 1910s, 1970s, and 1980s, but inflation had fallen to 3% by January 2025 when Mr. Trump took office. This January, inflation continued to ease to 2.4%. Jobs. "He was sleeping while you were trying to get a job. You weren't working, and now we have the most people working in history," in a rally in Georgia on Thursday, referring to Mr. Biden. This is misleading. Mr. Trump's claim ignores population growth and falsely described the employment situation under his predecessor. Other metrics show slower job growth and rising unemployment in Mr. Trump's first year back in office. More people are in the workforce, but the percent employed is flat under Trump. It is true that more people are employed now, about 159 million people in January, than any other point in U.S. history. But the population of the United States is also the biggest in its history, at more than 342 million people. Former President Joseph R. Biden Jr. could also have claimed to preside over the most people working during his term, as could most other presidents not in office during periods of economic downturns or recessions. But the labor force participation, those who were employed or actively looking for a job, has held steady under Mr. Trump, changing little from the 62.6% in January 2025 to 62.5% this January. The unemployment rate rose slightly from 4% to 4.3%. The economy added 359,000 jobs from February 2025 to January 2026, compared with more than 1.2 million in the previous year. Crime. Crime was a mess. Right now, 125 years, it's the lowest crime that we've had in 100 since 1900, in the NBC interview. This is exaggerated. Mr. Trump has a point that homicides are projected to reach a 125-year low in 2025, and broader categories of crime, too, are projected to decline. But that did not represent a stark reversal from 2024. Homicides expected to hit a historic low, but were declining before Trump took office. The Council on Criminal Justice, a nonpartisan think tank, estimated that the national homicide rate was likely to fall to the lowest rate recorded in 2025, to 4 per 100,000 residents. Official government estimates will be released later this year. In comparison, the rate for 2024 was 5 per 100,000 residents, according to official FBI data. The murder rate has been declining since a surge in 2020. While 2025 had the largest single-year decline in the murder rate, it followed 2 consecutive years of record-breaking declines. This change started in 2023, really, maybe the very end of 2022, so it's taking advantage of 2 previous enormous drops, said Jeff Asher, a crime analyst based in New Orleans. It's obvious that this is just what was happening before and it continued. While the Council on Criminal Justice did not release estimates for violent or property crime rates for 2025, Mr. Asher believes that preliminary data also show declines in those broader categories. Still, he cautioned that historic comparisons should be taken with a grain of salt given limitations in older data. Immigration. By the way, we went from the worst border in history to the best, by far the best border in history, in a White House reception on Wednesday. This is slightly exaggerated. Unauthorized crossings at the southwestern border plunged to the lowest levels in more than half a century, not quite in history, from record highs in 2022 and 2023. But the numbers had fallen sharply in 2024 and decreased even more under Mr. Trump. Illegal border crossings are sharply down under Trump. Immigration officials recorded more than 237,000 encounters in the 2025 fiscal year, which began in October 2024 and ended in September 2025. That was the lowest since 1970, when officials recorded about 200,000 encounters. In comparison, 2022 had the highest number of encounters on record, at more than 2.2 million. Monthly encounters peaked in December 2023 at nearly 250,000 and fell consistently in 2024 after Mr. Biden imposed severe restrictions on asylum at the border. By December 2024, the number had declined to about 47,000, about level with the numbers at the end of Mr. Trump's first term. crossings declined even more in Mr. Trump's first year back in office to fewer than 6,500 in December 2025. For many cash-strapped Americans, basic living has become a burden. President Trump says that he has brought down inflation, but families are still struggling to pay bills and plan for the future. For 13 years, Maribel McBeath has cleaned plane cabins at the airport in Charlotte, North Carolina. She earns $16.50 an hour, which is not enough to cover her expenses. About half goes to rent or allow her to save for the future. At 66, Ms. McBeath would like to be counting down to retirement. She had hoped that by now she could regularly visit her family in Puerto Rico, explore new places, and enjoy going out to dinner occasionally. But with a pile of medical bills and no cushion for a financial emergency, I have to keep working, she said. For millions of Americans, affordability has become a defining issue as the soaring cost of big-ticket necessities such as housing, education, healthcare, and childcare takes a toll on household budgets. Though unemployment is lower and inflation has slowed, data points that President Trump will likely cite in his State of the Union address on Tuesday, recent economic gains have largely benefited the wealthy. In interviews, some working Americans said the improved economy does not reflect their real-world struggles to pay bills or plan for the future. They have a hard time making sense of Mr. Trump's claims that he has defeated inflation and the rising stock market has no bearing on their income. Kristen Arrico, 43, a managing editor at a small publishing house in New York, wishes Mr. Trump would dispense with the "I've won affordability" rhetoric and use Tuesday's speech to explain in detail how he plans to address the cost of groceries, housing, and childcare. Everything is up 20% in cost except my salary, she said. The financial crunch has forced even solidly middle-class people to make difficult decisions, from delaying retirement or college to cutting grocery lists or relying on food banks. Some have taken second and third jobs in recent years to stay afloat, inspiring the modern term polyworking. The number of people with multiple jobs in January was about 8.6 million, according to monthly figures from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. For so many people, basic living has become a burden, said Aaron Hatton, a professor of sociology at the State University of New York at Buffalo, who studies the labor market. The fact is that there are so many people that don't have a couple extra $100 if faced with an emergency, or they can pay their bills but can't save for their retirement. Even as overall inflation is cooling, prices of many everyday staples remain uncomfortably high. Grocery prices, often the barometer for people's perception of the economy and their own financial stability, are still rising. Though the price of eggs has dropped, the price of coffee was up nearly 20% in January from a year earlier. Beef prices were up by 16.4%, and the price of frozen fish has jumped 8.6%, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. People are dissatisfied because what they are looking for is not the inflation rate to get smaller, but for the prices to get smaller, said Michael Walden, a professor emeritus in economics in North Carolina State University. For Ms. McBeath, every financial decision is a trade-off. She missed the initial enrollment window for Medicare after she turned 65, but plans to enroll as soon as possible. Without insurance, she pays about $105 a month for medication. She doesn't own a car, so she generally depends on public buses and Ubers for transportation. It is a struggle every month. I pay my rent, and then I pay enough to keep the lights and water running, said Ms. McBeath, who is employed by an American Airlines subcontractor and has worked with the Service Workers Union to press for higher wages. For average consumers, the data points and political sniping over affordability barely register as they try to make ends meet. Until late last year, Aviva W., a preschool teacher, and her husband, a warehouse manager, earned about $80,000 a year combined. They rent a 3-bedroom house for $3,300 a month in North Miami Beach, straining their finances because, as Orthodox Jews, it allows them to be within walking distance of their synagogue. Aviva asked that her last name not be used because she did not want people to know about her financial struggles. In October, Aviva's husband was laid off, and he has not found a comparable position. Instead, he has been stringing together odd jobs, and relatives have stepped in to supplement their income. They have also relied on a kosher food bank owned by Jewish Community Services of South Florida. The couple searched for a less expensive rental near the synagogue but did not find one, she said, and could not afford the cost of moving, regardless. It's been very tight, said Aviva, a 42-year-old mother of 4, adding that she is looking for a summer job. We are taking things day by day and hoping things turn around. The financial struggle has shifted the way she thinks about her future, but some days purchasing a house or paying for college tuition feels far away. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Bonnie Schwartzbaum, the director of the food bank where Aviva shops twice a month, said the average number of people using their service each month had increased by more than 50% since 2020. She said that after families tackled their biggest costs, there was little left for groceries. People across the board have been priced out, Ms. Schwartzbaum said. Even many of those whose income places them in the middle class find themselves making hard choices. Ms. Arrico is just on the other side of a series of events that threatened to upend the life she and her husband had built in Mineola, New York. It started with the cost of childcare, one of the biggest expenses that families face. The daycare bills set us back, she said. In fact, we tumbled into debt. In 2018, the couple was earning about $182,000 combined. But with 2 young daughters, they struggled to afford the $3,500 monthly daycare bill, which was more than their mortgage. That year, they got a home equity loan to help cover their costs. In 2021, when interest rates dropped to record lows, they refinanced their house and wiped out their debt. But a year later, as inflation was soaring, Ms. Arrico's husband suffered a devastating medical episode and lost his 6-figure job. Faced with the loss of his income and mounting bills, the couple took out a second home equity loan with a much higher interest rate and reduced their younger daughter's daycare hours. In 2023, Ms. Arrico started a second job as a freelance copy editor, working evenings and weekends. We were quickly reaching a precipice that's hard to come back from, she said. That same year, her husband returned to the workforce, again earning 6 figures. Ms. Arrico finally felt stable and started using the money from her second job to rebuild their savings and pay for a few extras, such as her daughter's dance lessons and the occasional discounted theater outing. Still, she worries about the cost of replacing an aging boiler and how long their 2 15-year-old cars will last, and she worries about how quickly they can build a college fund for their daughters, now 8 and 11. I want to be able to afford a comfortable life, she said, not just a roof over my head and food on the table. A tourist is jolted by violence in Mexico. When violence broke out after the killing of Mexico's most wanted cartel boss, vacation spots ordinarily spared from the drug wars were also targeted. Shasta Townsend, a Canadian who helps foreigners relocate to the Mexican tourist magnet Puerto Vallarta, was driving into the city Sunday morning when she spotted a large column of smoke off in the distance. Several cars along the road had flat tires, and it soon became clear why. As she looked on, she said 2 men on a motorcycle pulled up and started scattering spikes on the road. That was a little heart-racing, Ms. Townsend said. Hours earlier, Mexican security forces had killed the most powerful cartel leader in the country. Now the cartel was wreaking revenge, blocking roadways and setting shops afire across Mexico, and some tourist towns like Puerto Vallarta, ordinarily spared Mexico's drug violence, were also in the crosshairs. On Monday, the coastal city was still shrouded in smoke and unease, but with the violence appearing to abate, people began venturing out onto the streets. The mayor of Puerto Vallarta, Luis Ernesto Munguia, said the city was taking emergency measures to restore order, including restoring public transportation services. A day earlier, the U.S. government had advised stranded Americans to shelter in place in parts of the country. Cruise ships quickly recharted their courses, taking a pass on a popular tourist destination now plunged into chaos. But it was too late for some visitors. They were already in the thick of things. Among them was Mitchell Fain, an actor from Chicago. "It's like, how are we going to get the hell out of here?" he said in an interview on Sunday evening. On Monday, Shauna Pelaborde, an American tourist who had taken shelter with her mother, stood among hundreds of people lined up almost around the block outside one of the first grocery stores to reopen. Just hours earlier, she said, when commuters would normally have been going to work and students to school, the major highway next to her hotel was almost empty. "It was just a wait-and-see situation," she said, 59, who lives in California and owns a jewelry company. When the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, vowing revenge for the death of its leader, Nemesio Asaguara Cervantes, many people across the country, despite assurances from the government, worry about what the next few days or even hours might bring. Jamie Alexander, a Canadian living in Puerto Vallarta who works with a vacation rental agency, said he saw people lining up outside small markets and bakeries in the Zona Romantica, the main tourist neighborhood, Monday morning. Some emerged with large loads of supplies. The scenes reminded him of the panic buying during the early days of the pandemic. "I saw people coming out of the grocery stores with like 6 loaves of bread," he said. "What are you doing with 6 loaves of bread?" It's this sense of urgency that the worst is going to happen. Even tourists who were able to leave their hotels to get supplies were not sure what their next move would be. Several airlines have canceled flights, including United, Delta, American, and Alaska. The airlines have issued travel advisories for airports in Puerto Vallarta and Guadalajara, waiving change fees for passengers whose itineraries are affected. President Claudia Sheinbaum of Mexico said she hoped flights would be fully restored no later than Tuesday. Ms. Townsend, the Canadian tourist advisor, said that after she saw the motorcyclists spreading spikes on Sunday, she and her husband were able to navigate through the intersection and make it to a Holiday Inn where clients were staying. Multiple fires burned around them, she said, with a bus and motorcycle set ablaze a block away. Exploding tires sounded like gunshots. But by just after 9 a.m. on Monday, she said, though she could still see smoke from a burning fire, the streets looked calmer. From her hotel window a few floors up, she could see people walking their dogs and even holding hands as the day began. That, she said, was what normal looked like in Puerto Vallarta. Within about 24 hours, peace and order have been restored, at least for today, she said. Iran could direct proxies to attack U.S. targets abroad, officials warn. Security officials are monitoring increasingly worrisome signs as President Trump considers another military campaign against Iran. U.S. and other Western security officials say they are monitoring increasingly worrisome signs that Iran could direct proxies to conduct retaliatory terrorist attacks against American targets in Europe and in the Middle East if President Trump orders large-scale strikes against Iran. The officials, speaking on the condition of anonymity to discuss confidential intelligence assessments, say they have not yet detected any specific plots in the works, but they say heightened chatter, spy jargon for electronic intercepts of terrorist communications, indicates some level of attack planning and coordination. Threats abound. There is concern among intelligence and counterterrorism officials that Tehran could enlist the Houthis in Yemen to resume attacks on Western shipping in the Red Sea. There is also concern in Europe that Hezbollah sleeper cells, or even al-Qaeda or its affiliates, could be ordered to attack American bases or embassies. One senior U.S. official said that government analysts were tracking a lot of activity and planning, but that it was unclear what could trigger an attack. Iran can work through proxies to conduct terrorist attacks that will raise costs for any U.S. military campaign, said Colin P. Clark, the executive director of the Soufan Center, an intelligence and consulting firm in New York. The uncertainty further complicates the Trump administration's war planning. The ambiguity around Mr. Trump's as-yet unstated goals, options ranging from limited strikes against military targets to toppling Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, may lead Iran's government to see an American-led offensive as an existential threat. As a result, Iran could escalate the conflict against the United States and Israel in ways it did not during their attacks in June or after the U.S. military assassinated General Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, in 2020. As part of a military buildup in the Middle East in recent weeks, the Pentagon has rushed additional Patriot batteries and other missile defenses to help protect the 30,000 to 40,000 American troops stationed in the region. But a terrorist attack would probably target less well-defended targets. If the U.S. military campaign against Iran is existential for the Supreme Leader and the most senior members of the IRGC, I would fully expect Tehran to order terror attacks abroad, including in Europe, Mr. Clark said. A senior Western official said the United States and its allies in Europe and the Middle East were well aware of the threat of potential hybrid responses, including terrorist attacks, and that Western governments were continuously reviewing intelligence reports on those threats. On Friday, the top Democrat on the Senate Armed Services Committee warned the Trump administration about the risks of attacking Iran in the coming days. Military strikes on Iran would risk igniting a wider regional war, endangering American forces across the Middle East and destabilizing global markets in ways that would harm everyday Americans, Senator Jack Reed, Democrat of Rhode Island, said in a statement. Before any military action is considered, President Trump must come before the American people, explain why any conflict would be necessary, be honest about the risks and costs, and present a clear strategy with a defined endgame, said Mr. Reed, a West Point graduate and former officer in the 82nd Airborne Division. Security specialists also warned that an attack on Iran would be significantly more complex than the military's operation in Venezuela in January to capture President Nicolas Maduro and could potentially draw the United States into a protracted conflict. Although Iran's proxies in the region, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, and the government of President Bashar al-Assad in Syria have been battered or ousted in the past year, what remains still poses a significant potential threat to Americans and American interests, particularly in the Middle East, U.S., and Western officials say. The Iranian-led global axis of resistance is sharply diminished in areas immediately bordering Israel, but is still capable just beyond that reach in places like Iraq and Yemen, and even farther afield where the presence was smaller but still significant, said William F. Weschler, the senior director of the Atlantic Council's Middle East programs and a former top Pentagon counterterrorism policy official. The heightened risks from Iran and its proxies come at a time when U.S. and Western military and counterterrorism officials are already on edge over rumblings in the past several months about the possibility of a mass casualty attack carried out by al-Qaeda in Europe. Al-Qaeda is looking to stage an attack to remain relevant and attract followers, according to Western intelligence analysts. Al-Qaeda's ambition for external operations remain high and may be increasing, a United Nations Security Council counterterrorism assessment concluded this month. The FBI had published a photograph of Saif al-Adel, the de facto head of al-Qaeda in Iran. In a war between Iran and the United States, some analysts believe Qaeda operatives could be directed to carry out terrorist attacks in Europe or the Middle East. Last year, there were heightened concerns that the group was planning an attack, a federal law enforcement official said. A United Nations Security Council counterterrorism report concluded last July that Mr. al-Adel had ordered 2 top lieutenants to reactivate cells in Iraq, the Syrian Arab Republic, Libya, and Europe. The move was indicative of al-Qaeda's continued longer-term intent to carry out external operations, the report said. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the February 24th issue of the New York Times. Your reader has been Patty Young. Thank you for listening.